another episode of the Legion Units Rundowns on the Bearfoot Miniatures channel. Today we're going to be going over the Elites choices. You might have noticed that I'm not joined by Phil today, who's been doing these Force Organisation slot rundowns, essentially, and that is what has caused me to go through the Elites choices rather than what we were going to do, which is the fast choices. And that's because I think actually Elites in the Legions list are more cut and dry than the fast choices. So there would have been less disagreements, I think, on the Elites choices than there were going to be on the fast choices. And that's for a couple of reasons, because I think that the Elites choices tend to lend themselves to more singular ways of play almost than the fast choices or for the other choices in the list. I think there are more cut and dry sort of builds that you do now with them. As well as that, I think that there's obviously a couple of shining stars in the Elite section that just sort of dominate games now. And I'll let everyone have a guess at what I would say the two of those are. And we'll get to them when we come to it, I suppose. So first we have the Legion Veteran Squad. That's 115 points. You get 5 dudes with weapon skill 5 and 2 wounds is their main thing over normal Marines, along with 2 attacks and leadership 8 to standard on both the standard guys and the veteran sergeant. Now, what are you getting as war gear? You get a bolt gun, bolt pistol, but you no longer get a close combat weapon or chainsword like you used to. And actually, it catches me out quite a lot in thinking that I just come standard with it. There's been a number of times where I've gone into a game being like, oh yeah, my veterans are all tooled up, or I don't need to upgrade them, and it's basically just caught me out as we get into combat. They also get chosen warriors as standard, which is a very nice rule for tying people up in challenges. If you can get them stubborn somehow, maybe with, I suppose a herald just makes you fearless anyway, but having a herald in there will allow you to tie up Primarchs really well in combat. It's an excellent rule to just have, just for a bit of utility in who you're going to be allowed to be punked. Like, you just allow yourself to get punked one at a time and just type a Primarch for all game if you can take out the rest of the unit. So yeah, that's the standard profile, and really these guys start to shine when you come into the weapons options. So I think we'll just go straight onto, if I'm actually competent. There we go. Yes, straight onto the next page. So you can get an additional 5 guys for 18 points each, which, considering the stat line, I would say is definitely worth it. That weapon skill 5 is massive, and when compared to a tactical marine at plus 10 points, I'd say the difference is really worth it if you're already taking vet squads. One noticeable thing, I suppose, as we're comparing them to tax, they don't have line. I think that's a big omission from vets. It's my personal opinion that all infantry should have line, all troops choices at least, veterans and seekers, because I sort of don't see why the veteran squad loses line. Like, your tacticals become more veteran and lose the ability to stand on an objective and hold ground. It seems a bit weird. Actually, I would have preferred line than the chosen warriors rule, just because why do they lose it? So yeah, I would take them in larger squads, like 8 to 10 being my preferred. I always seem to end up with 8 for some reason on this style of squad. It just feels like a big enough number to be able to soak up some hits, especially with those 2 wounds, and not too unwieldy on the tabletop. So for the rest of the options, where do I think these really come into their own? So it's the close combat weapons, right? Is with the BS4, you're not getting too much over any other type of marine, I would say, because they're just standard at shooting. It's kind of almost a waste of them, barring a few scenarios. So then it comes into the upgrades for combat weapons. Bayonet and Chainblade, they're nice upgrades for going that +1 attack. I suppose you don't really need it because you've got 1 more attack than tacticals, but when everyone can take a power weapon for 5 points each, I think that's definitely where I'd be going, and it is where I frequently go when I end up using them. Power weapons, like between 4 and 8 of them. Essentially, any model can take 2 lightning claws for 10 points a model. Also, a great choice at that weapon skill 5, staying at initiative, ending with 4 attacks a model. Though obviously you're forgoing your bolter, but does that matter because they're so much better in combat than you are in the shooting game? For every 5 models in the unit, 1 model can take a special weapon, essentially. As I said, I tend to forgo the ranged options with them in general, so I'd miss out those. Any model in the unit may change its bolter for a combi weapon, a Astartes shotgun, or Nemesis bolter. And really, this is the section that I think half discards what I've said about the shooting game for veterans. Now, combi weapons used to be a massive thing on veterans, especially the combi melters. Now that veteran skills have gone, so you can't get +1 to your damage roll against tanks for melters, I think combi weapons have gone down a lot, really. Like, if I was going to take combi weapons on vets, I'd probably just take Seekers for the +1 ballistic skill, because you don't need to be as sturdy. With Heresy 2 no longer having veteran skills, I'd say combi weapons aren't as good as they used to be. I tend to take them on Seekers because of the ballistic skill 5, but what vets come into their own with is Nemesis bolters for the +10 points a model. Now, when I played on Sector Wargaming, must have been a year ago now, maybe over, Ed really used his Nemesis bolters on his veterans to great effect. And that's they shone from a mixture of being veterans and being Night Lords. Now, it's something that anyone can sort of pull off with the addition of a Techmarine, but the Nemesis bolters combined with your Relentless from being vets, which is one that I skipped out under the special rules, sorry. Yeah, your Relentless on vets mostly ties into these Nemesis bolters, because your bolters aren't really going to do enough to be worth firing almost. It's sometimes worth it in a clutch situation, but it's the Nemesis bolters I find they really come to their own with, because you can move about, reposition, and fire your Nemesis bolters, making them basically a better recon squad. And recon squads are good now, right? So, yeah, the Nemesis bolters and Relentless really ties in nicely. Obviously, on the sergeants, I imagine everyone can guess Power Fist or Thunderhammer, which one I'd take for 25 points versus the 20 points. And also the Artificer armor, pretty standard. For the actual power weapons, I think this comes into your Legion specifically. So I actually really like my Iron Warriors with heavy chainswords and a grav mace on the sergeant. It's not the greatest choice ever, but it's quite a nice option to take on dreadnoughts. I find that a single squad can have a good chance of getting the job done. And yes, like 2 of the veterans are going to get battered in return. Being able to have that, well, the heavy chainswords aren't the optimal choice, right? Probably power axes and trying to go for the 5s to wound. But they just, heavy chainswords are cool. The grav mace with the weapon skill 5 lets you be able to strike into a dreadnought on 4s rather than 5s on a tactical squad. So that's, I find, quite a nice use for them, other than the Nemesis bolters. We've got essentially the only weapon skill 5 infantry Night Lords can take, because terror squads are weapon skill 4. And when I say infantry, I mean like power armored infantry without a jump pack. We get fists having very good Nemesis bolters due to the +1 to hit. So that's stacked nicely in the same way as the Night Lords. And they're just quite veterans, I mean, are quite a nice sort of middle of the road option for legions without the best power armored combat infantry. They're not going to perform as well as the legion specific infantry. I don't think anyone really expects them to perform that well versus the legion specific ones, but it is one that I find, playing mainly a legion that doesn't have a power armored combat infantry, it's one that I find myself using quite often to fill that gap, at least in a middle of the road trade out sense, even if I'm not expecting super good things from them. The legions that have good combat infantry, I'd say sort of skip this choice unless you're going to do the Nemesis bolters. And the world doesn't need more Nemesis bolters, I don't think, but it is a good option. And that's because I think the Legion specific choices, if we just run through a couple of them, the benefits of the veteran squad for, say, Emperor's Children with Palatine Blades. The charnable weapons on Palatine Blades are going to be rending just as often, and then you have skill unmatched on top. For Ultramarines, you're going to have Suzerain and your Praetorian Breaches, although not brilliant when compared to Suzerain, have an invulnerable save that your veteran squad isn't going to have. Space Wolves, I suppose, like I don't see many veteran squads from Space Wolves, but actually they're not one that I would forgo, sort of looping back to the ones without good power armored infantry. But Grey Slayer squads are just so ubiquitous and taken often by Space Wolves. I hardly ever see them. Even down to Thousand Sons with Kanatai Blades, I think forgo the veterans because the Legion specific infantry end up rending more and are just better because of the psychic powers and stuff. So finally, to say on veterans, transports. Now, Rhinos are a good option if you're taking the shooting veterans option. Termite assault drills, with how they come in sort of the 2 stage where people can only intercept the termite but not the veteran squad, I would say are quite good so long as you have enough of your army on the table that you won't miss this unit for potentially a quarter of the game if you play in the Siege of Chthonian missions. And that can actually be a big thing. Like missing out on a full unit that can get quite expensive in the form of veterans can potentially lose you the game. So I like the termite drill. You've got to be very wary with your army composition. Drop pods I'm not a massive fan of because obviously you disembark and then can get intercepted, and it's essentially a free shooting phase for your opponent when you do that. I mean, deep stripes can work, but I'd be doing it as a mass army drop, or at least a small amount of your army on the board that you know can survive for a turn or two, and then like 80% of your army coming in to perform the alpha strike. So moving on to Cataphractii Terminator squads. So Cataphractii, Cataphractii at 175 points, their movement 6, weapon skill 4, which I think is a big hit on them compared to the Legion specific ones, whereas Vets didn't take that hit because their weapon skill is 5. Strength toughness 4, 2 wounds, obviously same as the veterans, 2 attacks, 3 attacks on the sergeant, leadership 7 and 8 on the sergeant, so slightly worse than the vets, 2 up save, and a 4 up invulnerable. They've got relentless, inexorable, can't sweep, and that's obviously built into the Cataphractii armor, rather than heavy, but they have got heavy. And yeah, so the Terminator squads, and I'll try and do them quite succinctly because they are very much combat monsters. You pretty much always want to take the Thunder Hammers on them, though recently I have started seeing a few Lightning Claws, and they've been quite successful against select target. That being my Iron Circle when I was at Scandus. Stefan had, I think it was actually a Tartarus squad, I believe, but just the armor didn't come into it really. It was more the striking at initiative, getting lots of attacks, and making up for that weapon skill 4, I think. In that loadout, I don't think they can pick on other Death Stars or Doom Balls or whatever we're calling them now, but I think they can be quite good. Now, we went over this unit in the Legion Terminators review, so if you want a really in-depth Cataphractii Terminator breakdown, go there, but if you want a succinct one, I'd recommend the Thunder Hammers. Bit of a change to recommend the Lightning Claws. I don't think you need a dedicated transports. I tend to just take them in bigger squads and run them. That's just my personal opinion. Though, if you are only taking 5, a Proteus can be useful to get you an extra free movement phase at worst, and at best, obviously keeping them safe further into the game. This is where I really wouldn't recommend heavy weapons choices or special weapons choices, because it's just allowing your enemy that return fire and potentially making you charge longer when the core of this unit is really an assault unit. So who do I think do really well with Cataphracti? I think Salamanders with the +1 invulnerable save. Fists, as good as the Salamanders from the 3-up invulnerable, but why you wouldn't take a Tartarus squad with your Storm Shields, I don't know. Though it's obviously not a downside of taking them versus anyone else. It's still a 3-up invulnerable. It's just there's better options for that Storm Shield elsewhere. And really, those two, I think, are the ones that really excel. Space Wolves get the weapon skill 5 on the charge. That's really nice. Though Varigir sort of muscle those out by getting weapon skill 6 on the charge. And I do think they're a good big blob of wounds. And I tell you what, my Tyrants with their weapon skill 4 and loads of fists do work. Things tend to bounce off them more than I would expect. So it's not one to forgo, but I wouldn't say they're in the greatest place when compared to the Legion's specific choices, sort of like vets. So on to Tartarus squads. So for 150 points, 25 less than the Cataphracti, we get 1 less invulnerable save and you lose heavy. So Space Wolves are going to be running rather than getting +1 weapon skill. Now, this is more of a unit that you see picking on lighter units, so not into your opponent's death ball, though trading out with your Tartarus with Thunderhammers can still work because both squads tend to do so much damage to each other that you just mutually wipe each other out. Again, if you want to catch a more in-depth view of the Tartarus squads, I'll link the video down below. But yeah, it's a nice squad, especially all 3 of these, the veterans, the Tartarus and the Cataphracti, working in Pride of the Legion and becoming line when they're the compulsory slots. I think they're a good option for the compulsory slots. There's certainly no massive downside of taking them, because they're not actually that expensive. At 150 points, you still get the 10 wounds. You don't get the extra attack for charging, so tacticals will be getting 5 attacks more than you. But obviously with the power weapons and things like that, it's quite a nice choice for the points. You're obviously missing out on that line, which I do think these 3 elite slots that we've just been through do need to sort of bring them up into competitiveness properly. But other than that, my thoughts on them go the same as the Cataphracti. So that's no heavy weapons or special weapons, because you're just inviting shooting death on yourself. Except more so because you're invulnerable save of 5 up. And yet into the Thunderhammers or Lightning Claws, as I said, Stefan at Scandus used them really nicely against my Iron Circle at least, and just absolutely swamped my Iron Circle and did quite a lot of damage. The ones that really shine here, I would say, are in Space Wolves and Fists. And I know I've mentioned both of those both times, but Fists being a 3-up and still having the ability to sweep, Tartarus squads are absolutely excellent. Space Wolves being able to run and charge gives them that difference over Varigir that I negatively compared the Cataphracti to. And so they can keep up with your infantry by running and get the charge off at the same time to add that extra hit and survivability to your Space Wolves charge. Now, Salamanders, again, can add their Storm Shields to the Tartarus squads, and I think that's a good option as like a halfway house for a 4-up invulnerable save while still being able to sweep. So it's like the benefits of everyone else's Cataphracti while still being able to sweep with the benefits of Tartarus. And I think that's a real nice use for them in that Legion. So next we go on to the Mortalis Destroyer Squad. And I'll do at the same time the Destroyer Assault Squad, which is 105 points for the Mortalis Destroyer Squad. So that's Sans jump packs. You get basically the stats of a tactical marine except an additional attack. The Assault Squad is exactly the same. You get 2 bolt pistols, a chainsword, so you're re-rolling your to wounds in combat. Rad grenades, so the enemy is at -1 toughness in combat. Power armor, obviously. You get stubborn, counterattack 1, and bitter duty. So bitter duty, after just looking it up, because I knew I'd just got that wrong, bitter duty is no characters that don't have that special rule may join your squad, including Apothecaries and Techmarines. So essentially, unless you gain bitter duty from somewhere else, you can't be joined by a consul or a praetor. Now, that obviously doesn't work in the opposite direction. So nowadays, your Moritat can join at any squad because it's only a squad can't be joined by a character. A character can join a squad. So it sort of leaves them in the lurch. The destroyers used to be really good for a Moritat drive-by delivery team. And they've lost that a little bit, sadly, because the Moritat having rad grenades means that they can be transplanted onto any other unit rather than having to simultaneously charge with your destroyer squad like you would have to do otherwise to pull off those rad grenades. They've lost out slightly in this edition on that. Stubborn is really nice. Counterattack 1 is really nice. Means that although your enemy is getting +1 attack on the charge, if you hold the line, you counterattack means that actually you get +1 attack and they don't, or you're just equal at that +1 attack. And it's just a nice little rule to have to increase the number of attacks over veterans. Not having weapon skill 5 hurts, but it goes a bit of a way to mitigate that in that first round of combat where destroyers are much harder because of the rad grenades. You can take up to 5 additional destroyers for 12 points a model. At only 12 points a model, this is 2 points more than a tactical marine, of which you get an additional bolt pistol, so you're basically rapid firing and charging if you wanted to. A chainsword, which is re-rolling. The rad grenades, yes, you probably pay for that in the squad tax, but including the counter attack. And stubborn, it's a good deal for 12 points. You just don't have that line. Just as I said, the main downside is that you can get those rad grenades elsewhere now. Of the other upgrades, Vexilla, take it if you're going to be near the table edge at any point, really. Nuncio Vox, take it if you've got scattering stuff and not got things elsewhere. That's the only reason in this unit, because you've got stubborn and aren't taking negatives to your leadership due to night fighting because of that. Augury scanners, completely useless unless you're really into your 2 special weapons intercepting things or paying the points for your bolt pistols too. The entire unit taking melter bombs is nice for 25 points. I really like hiding, say, like Thalax in cover and forcing a Dreadnought to charge me. So then we both strike in at initiative 1, and you can usually take out a Dreadnought that way. However, it's harder to bait that Dreadnought. Because you don't have line, you need another line unit there, because the objective is usually the bait that they have to charge through your melter bomb squad to get to. Any model may replace both of its bolt pistols with 2 very expensive weapons. The Volkite Serpenters, 10 points a model, much too expensive, I think, to be worth taking, especially which on vets, and I know I skipped it as an option, but vets can take a Volkite Serpenter, 5 points each. I suppose it's the same price, but for 2, isn't it? I just don't think it's worth 5 points, because you're just, again, inviting people to shoot back at you, and especially on a 1 wound, 3 up save frame, you're just taking casualties that you don't need to. Hand flamers, I would say aren't great, but artwork and the thought of a hand flamer is really cool, so it's not an option that I would suggest as being a particularly competitive option. However, especially because, right, when you want to hold the line so that your enemy's not getting any benefits and you get your rads and your counter attack, your hand flamer is going to make you want to Overwatch, so you get your wall of death. So it just doesn't mesh that well, but it's hand flamers, you can get 2 of them. For every 5 models in the unit, 1 destroyer may take one of these options. And grav guns, good for the dreadnought baiting, making them charge through difficult terrain. Disintegrators can be fun because they've got instant death. Missile launchers with Suspenser and Rad. Now this is the one that I've got mine modelled with, and it's the one I tend to use because you can't get anywhere else. It's mainly the grav gun that I'd pick, and for that Overwatch, I suppose it's the main reason I would hold the line against a dreadnought is for that grav gun, because you're stubborn, so it doesn't matter as much if they get the +1 attack, because it's only at most squishing 1 more guy, and you're not going to run away that easily anyway. On to the Sergeant's weapons, and does he take Artificer armor? Yes, he takes a Thunderhammer. Yes, he takes Artificer armor. Don't massively see the reason to take anything else in these lists anymore. It's the illusion of choice is, I think, how Phil most likes to say it. It's the illusion of choice without actually having a choice. Because none of the options really mesh well with the rad grenades. The power mace, the power maul being strength 6, but only with AP 3, means that if your opponent is wise, they will be asking you, what weapon does your sergeant have? Oh, he's got a power maul, so he doubles out, say, my veterans, which is the only thing that's really worthwhile doubling out with an AP 3 weapon. Okay, I'll challenge with the sergeant, which has a 2-up save. So it goes down massively in value. None of the other weapons really mesh, so then it comes down to the best weapon on that list. Does your sergeant want to take a Phosphex bomb? Now, for the Mortalis Destroyer squad, I wouldn't say so that much, and that's due to the limited range of 6. So it's a range 6, 1 use, small blast, strength 5 but poison 3 up, so you're always wounded on the 3, AP 2. And it is also, let me get to it, it is also lingering death, so it creates dangerous terrain around it, and crawling fire. Crawling fire means that you can move it 2 inches to try and get more models under the template. That limited range really limits the use, and so you're going to a lot of the time see this on Overwatch, in which most of the time you'll want to hold the line. Against a dreadnought, it's 10 points for a 3-up chance of a wound. If your squad's got melter bombs to be dread hunting, you don't really need that additional wound or the chance of it. The amount of times it actually comes off isn't worth the 10 points, I wouldn't say. Now, would I change that for the assault squad? Do you know what? Let's do the assault squad now. So for the transports, I really like the Rhino. They've got the counter attack to jump out and then take the charge with holding the line, so you get the benefits, not your enemy. I think it goes away to mitigating the Rhino's downsides. It also allows you, if you have got the sort of Moritat in the squad, and I know I said that wasn't necessary anymore, but if you have, you can jump out chain fire, right? Proteus carriers allowing you to charge is quite nice, but just a bit expensive on a squad that isn't that brilliant. So that leaves us with the other option of transport, which is the assault squad. The assault squad, I would say, is the better option of the two for 15 points more squad tax. So that's what, 2 points a model, 3 points a model more, which then follows through into the additional destroyers, which are 3 points more a model over normal destroyers. You just get much more utility out of them, in that you can move 12 every turn, which I know when you pile out of a raider, let's say, you can move 13. The assault squad, obviously doing that every turn, and then plussing 1 to the charge, I just find cheaper and more reliable in just board presence. Why would I then say the Phosphex bomb is worth it? Well, you can get closer with an assault squad. You can jump into a building for if you want to be really dangerous, onto the top floor and start dropping them off. A 5-man destroyer assault squad that I actually took to Scandus Heresy 1, but the actual theory of it hasn't changed did a lot of work for me, being able to jump into the covers that I wanted, get in the way, bait dreadnoughts a lot more because I just, and knights at the time, just could much more easily stick myself in the way. And having that Phosphex bomb is going to come off more often. That's essentially the difference between the two units. I suppose you're also going to get into hand flamer range more often, so you can do your shooting attack before charging with the +1. So a slight benefit of the assault squad with a jump pack there, because as you kill models after your movement phase, so after your Proteus transport would have got you 1 inch closer, your jump pack makes up for that 1 inch by performing it in the assault phase, when you can't kill outside of 8 inches of your flamer range anyway. So there's a slight benefit to the assault squad based on having jump packs and hand flamers. And yeah, it's just, I find it a much nicer unit. I find it works. With the jump packs, they're very easy to hide. Now, pulling the sort of like rhino trick of jumping in and out does work as well. So I can see them being run in both ways. I just don't expect a load from my destroyers anymore. I don't think they're the best unit, and I just tend to use them for fun in both iterations of them. So what do I think is the optimal use of destroyers? If you're including them in your list, basically you want to be looking out for spots where you can get a strength 6, be that with a furious charge and a power axe. Preferable, I suppose, is strength 6 and the opportunity to either be AP2 or rend on the charge, and striking first. These are things like Blood Angels with, I believe it's the spears in Dawnbreakers, or say your World Eaters, Rampager squads with cadre weapons, specifically the Meteor Hammers, and things like that. The problem is that the Moritat overlaps with this role, and you can just put it into that initial squad rather than having to have 2 squads that can't be denied their charge by the Hold the Line. It sort of just places out destroyers in the sort of like list building step of where, like, oh, I need to get my rag grenade to pull off this combo. So there's not that great of a space for destroyers to do that anymore, just with that being rolled into the Moritat, or I suppose I mentioned the World Eaters, them getting their own specific destroyer squad. To be pulling off those like rag grenade strength 6 combos, Blood Angels, well, they've always got the Inferno Pistol Moritat. For the turn that you come in, maybe that Moritat just goes into your squad, because the bitter duty doesn't stop the Moritat from joining another squad. It just stops characters from joining a bitter duty squad. So I suppose there is no super optimal way of using them anymore. There's a few very, very fun ways, and I'd like to stress that. As I said, the 5-man unit of assault destroyers that I like to take, destroyers in rhinos, are very fun, but just not the most optimal choice. So on to, you might have guessed it, one of the better choices in the elite slot, and one of the 2 ones that I thought everyone would guess at the start. So it's the -1, so 0 to 1 Techmarine Covenant, 55 points a model, of which you can have up to 8 Techmarines. Where to start on Techmarines? So I think there's 2 ways to run these, and it's not using the Battlesmith really. They have weapons, basically a tactical marine stat line with an additional attack, a 2-up save, leadership 8, so it's the same leadership as the sergeant in your squad, so you can take off your sergeant first and preserve your Cognisignum. You get a bolt pistol, power axe, servo arm for an additional strength 8 attack, just built into the cost. Artificer armor, you can join these to any power armored squad essentially that isn't bitter dutied with the Techmarine Covenant rule. One thing to look out for is if your last member of your squad ever dies, the Techmarine that's left automatically gets removed, and that's the same in the Apothecary as well. So you always pull your Techmarine second from last if you're preserving them. Though in the case of the Techmarine, I don't know why you wouldn't pull off the Techmarine like third to last to preserve 2 shots. So what upgrades would I take? So it's going to be one of two. Cognissignum for 15 points in the one of the following list. Or I'm going to be taking a Thunderhammer and a Boarding Shield. And that's just to get the Boarding Shields 5 up. That's going to be giving you the 2 options. It either adds a Thunderhammer into a squad that either couldn't previously take one, or just adds an additional Thunderhammer into any squad that you want, which is very useful. The other option being the Cognissignum. Right, and I'm not going to go like massively into Techmarines, because I think we all know by now they're absolutely incredible. Any shooting unit that you think is a mainstay needs a Techmarine with a Cognissignum, because it +1 to your ballistic skill in the shooting phase, ignores night fighting. That in itself gives you ignores shrouded saves, so your enemy can't evade. And all of that stacks up to much more value than the 70 points that the Techmarine is worth. If you're taking the Cognissignum, I wouldn't take anything else. Looking at the list, why would you wouldn't take an Augury Scanner for 5 points, because the Cognissignum essentially has the benefits to range of that built in. And I'd just take an Augury Scanner on another member of your squad. And especially if you're taking a Techmarine for an Augury Scanner, it's quite a lot of points just to save you that one reaction. Now, who benefits most from Techmarines? Now, Night Lords, you don't see loads of them because you already ignore night fighting and shrouded with your prey sight for only 15 points. Imperial Fist, you don't see lots of them in shooting, because if you favour auto weapons, you're already getting +1 ballistic skill based on your Legion rule. Now, every other Legion, your shooting units will benefit massively from the Cognissignum and essentially be restrained in it. I was looking for the right words to say, but we've been doing this now for about 18 months, and we all have the ability to write Techmarines into lists. I would say be restrained with where your Techmarines go. Yeah, unless you know your entire group is playing like that, in which case have a Kumite and then call it off and play with a lighter touch. The other style of Techmarine with the Thunderhammers, I think, are great for pretty much any Legion in combat. They're especially good for Imperial Fists, and I'm hesitant to bring it up again, but obviously you get the Boarding Shield plus a Cyber Familiar, so that's a 4-up, and then in a Phalanx Warder squad, you get a 3-up, and it's re-rollable because you have a Boarding Shield. And that creates a horrendous 3-up re-rolling stacked list that the Fists can do, along with their Praetors and Forge Lords even. So yeah, that's the two. It's to the point where I even have been putting Techmarines in my Iron Warriors lists in tactical squads at one point, and it made them a lot better because I was hitting on 2s, re-rolling 1s in my Iron Warriors with bolters. Was it the greatest list ever? No. Did the Techmarines make it better for the points that they were? Yes. So they're just too ubiquitous. I'll go on agreeing with myself for too long if I carry on talking about Techmarines. So if you don't fall into Night Lords where you take Prey Sight, or Fists where you're getting the +1 for auto weapons, I mean, take them in your I'd want to say Havoc squads. Take them in your Devastator heavy support squads, not Devastator squads. Jesus, I've been reading Bad Ab too much. So yeah, if you're not in one of those 2 legions, you want to be taking Techmarines on all of you, literally every shooting unit that isn't a normal tac blob, because you need to save points somewhere. So on to Apothecary detachments. 45 points a model for a 5-up Feel No Pain in your unit. It's the same stats as your Sergeant in a tactical squad, so you pull the Sergeant first because your Apothecary is still leadership 8 and is more worthwhile. So essentially it helps you get the 2-up tank from your Sergeant better. You don't have to fear losing the leadership from the Sergeant if you've got an Apothecary in there. Obviously, they've got a chainsword along with that, so they're slightly better in combat than your normal Marines, just as standard. Don't have a bolter. who cares, but you can upgrade to have a combi weapon or a Volkite charger. That's skippable. You can take a power weapon for 10 points or a charnable weapon for 10 points. Artificer armor for 10 points. I'd be tempted to take that, though. Snipers going after your apothecary, you're going to be seeking the rends anyway. So it might end up being wasted when you get sniped out, but you'll hate yourself if you don't take it and get sniped out by a normal save. What to say about apothecaries? They are auto-include in any special unit that is in power armor. So they join in the same way as Techmarines to any power armored unit. I think we all know this by now. And that, I suppose that's anything, including this is the Techmarines as well. You can't join them to a command squad because your Master of the Legion independent character starts in the command squad. And the Apothecarian and Techmarine detachment special rule says that you can't join independent characters. So you can't join them to a command squad, but any other unit that is halfway valuable is going to want an apothecary. And that's because ignoring a third of the wounds that come in that aren't las cannons, essentially, will just pay for itself near definitely across a game. It tends to pay for itself on tactical squads, especially now it's combined with Heart of the Legion, but you have to end up saving points somewhere. So those are either the first one that's dropped or just not bothered at the start. This is why I felt this was the right one to do with Phil not here for this elite selection one. We just need to take them on all of the units. They're almost too good nowadays, both Techmarines and Apothecaries, with having so many a slot, ignoring a third of the wounds. They're very, very good, worthwhile taking, and start pulling them from the worst units when you run out of points. On to Contemptors. This is another unit that I think we've all learned to fear. The Weapon Skill 5, Brutal 3, absolute terror of the tabletops now. 175 points. How much does everyone need me to wax about Dreadnoughts? They're really good. I think let's do a special episode specifically on Dreadnoughts and their combinations, I think, and we'll do all the Dreadnoughts in one go and specifically compare them. They're very good. Be restraining yourself. I think the limit of 1 per 1,000 points is a good thing to be playing with, and I think well, I'm trying not to say too little, but also not too much. 1 per 1,000 points is a good upper level of Dreadnoughts. I think 3 even in 3,000 points has a massive impact on the game, unless your opponent has an or comparative amount of Dreadnoughts to you. I know I have one Contemptor in my Iron Warriors. I don't tend to run it that much. I find when I'm playing other armies with the Dreadnoughts, they soak up so much firepower for that 175 points. They're well worth it. Outstrip that 175 points by a long way. What would I upgrade them with? It's dual Gravis multi-melters are absolutely excellent for 4 strength 8 shots at AP1. With their speed and the fact that a Gravis multi-melter is 12-inch range, you can get close to a tank and mean that it can't reverse out of your way. If it does, you just then shoot into something else that's really valuable and double out Terminators, things like that. 1 multi-melter and a Gravis Power Fist with a melter in keeps you having 3 shots out of the 4, doubles things out whilst also having utility in combat. It's been christened the Vectemptor pattern round here, and that was because he used it very well in his... He was actually the first one to cotton onto the multi-melter being good again in Heresy 2 around here, so he's had the name christened after him, the Vectemptor pattern. That's a very, very good one for preserving your close combat utility. And I personally really like 2 fists with Grav in the fists. And that's because I was running it Heresy 1. It was really good. Heresy 2, if another Dreadnought... I tend to use my Soul Contemptor to trade out for other Contemptors. To just get them off the field. I'm willing to pay those points to just get their Contemptor off the field, even if it's 1-for-1. If their Dreadnought charges my Dreadnought, I tend to Overwatch, fire my 2 Grab Fists, and then I get to punch them before they punch me. And with the Brutal 3, you've got a good chance of just wiping that Dreadnought out. What else to say? Everyone's Dreadnoughts are great. And yeah. Space Wolves, really good not being infantry. Getting the +1 weapon skill. It's hard to find a Contemptor that isn't brilliant in the Legions. So, I think finally we're on to the Rapier batteries. So that's 40 points a model. You can get up to 3 in a unit. You've got 3 options with Rapiers. I think James Ogg is going to be screaming at his screen when I say this, or he's just accepted it that I'm going to say it, is I really like the Rapier Heavy Bolters. And that is because they're only 40 points. Being able to throw them into a list where I've only got 40 points left over and nothing to spend it on is a great utility, I find. The amount of shots that they pump out and people don't want to return fire on them, I find is really good. Like, people write them off as useless, don't fire at them, and by the end of the game, they tend to have got their points back and then some. So there you go, James, it's out of the way. What else do I like? I think quad launchers have really gone downhill in this edition. Siege breakers aren't in the game as much, I find, with las cannons already having Sunder, so it doesn't need passing to them. Therefore, siege breakers are sort of out, which means you'd be paying a tax to get Phosphex shells. Phosphex shells are good. If you're taking a siege breaker, quad mortars really come back into it. But I found with the splinter shell for the breaching 6 or renning 6, I find it doesn't come off enough. I've used frag shells a lot on them, doesn't tend to come off enough. And shatter shells on Iron Warriors, strength 9, okay, but I find tanks tend to crumble to las cannons in Heresy 2 fast enough that I don't need quad launchers that can't return fire. So yeah, the quad launcher's massively down, and it's quite an expensive upgrade for plus 20 points per model. I find myself gravitating towards the laser destroyers more and more now. Not over Rapier Heavy Bolters, but in addition to. And that's because it's a nice, still quite cheap. It's got 2 shots for 4 wounds for the platform. Yes, you're only using the toughness 4 and not returning fire, but I find they're quite a low priority target still, especially for being strength 9 and AP 1. The 2 shots, twin linked, I tend to find they do work across the game, but it is the laser destroyer that is, I wouldn't say my go-to, but is my preferred option of the upgrades. The grav cannon, I've seen used really effectively against my Solar because it ignores 4-up saves, but there's better places to get those incidental 4-ups than the grav cannons. For 60 points each that can only do 1 hull point to a vehicle or 1 wound to a dreadnought, I just don't think those points add up. Now, saying all this, there is obviously the large downside that you can't return fire. It does put me off quite a lot, quite often, but when I actually play them in games, they might not be the most optimal choice, but I tend to find they do quite solid work, so I wouldn't completely write them out. And that, I think, is my thoughts on laser rapier, or on Legion Rapier batteries. Solid choice, often overlooked, and better than you'd think. And with that, we come to the end of the elites. This was quite a fast section. We will be going more into the longer formats and discussion formats that I think have worked quite nicely for the Legion Force Organisation slot rundowns. In the next one, hopefully, which will be fast, unless Phil really convinces me to do heavy supports. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to do all the YouTubey stuff. That lets me know from the analytics that you guys like seeing this content, so I'll produce more and do more breakdown and thoughts on the generic Legion units. If you really liked it, there is a Patreon link below where you can support the channel that little bit more and get yourself a dice tray, dice, access to the Discord, ad-free versions of these videos, as well as audio versions of the Tuesday guide videos. And with that, I will catch you next time in a bit.